think I'm about ready to start. Hello. Hello, welcome to the show. Got 21 minutes to kill. If you're watching this on YouTube later, just skip 20 minutes. Let's just see if it's gonna let me play right now. No, it's not gonna let me do it yet. So, midnight Australia time means I get to play it before the rest of the world. I see some people in New Zealand already streaming it, but well, I'll just show you. I won't show you my main guys. So I've got all these different profiles, and you can only have 3 in the demo. So just the idea of having 70 guys running around is going to be cool. So let me just show you my guys first. 20 minutes. So I think today I'll just try and unlock all the shops. How's my levels? Music coming through. So this one was my second lot. Call it DC Island. It tells me there's new clothes in the shop. I don't think I've got money for clothes. I got $1.20. So because it's the demo, this stuff I don't get more money. This stuff hasn't reloaded. I don't know why it told me there was new stuff. So this island, I've got Green Lantern. And if you don't know, in the demo, you get to the end and all they talk about is the full version of the game.
Huh. I was just about to come talk to you. By my oath, Alien Creative.
Just become ads.
Version. You can freely design clothing. Food,
for a thing I already bought. I'm already into it. Come on. So yeah, that's him. I can feed him.
Huh. Hey, what do you need?
But it doesn't, because I've already leveled him up. It doesn't really matter. Let's just give him one last nachos.
Yum.
Loved it. So in my actual island, I've got me, my wife, and Batman.
Oh.
Who am I gonna add today? I'm not even sure.
Attention.
Yeah.
It sounds like it.
Yeah. Let's give her one last. What's her favorite? Orange juice.
Yum.
She loves orange juice. So she's in love with Hal Jordan, but can't actually do anything about it until the game comes out. I know her favorite's paella. She goes nuts for it. She goes skiing for it. Skating for it. So this is the animation for the second favorite food. I haven't figured out what my favorite foods are yet. So yeah, she absolutely loved it.
Attention, big guy. I'm glad you decided to drop by, for love's sake.
Thank you. 11:42. Time is going so slow.
Huh.
I like Guy Gardner. I like his attitude. So his favorite is birthday cake, which I got on my birthday. But you only get one. No more orange juice. Tacos? He's got tacos.
Yum.
16 minutes 50. So those are those guys. That's probably gonna be the last time I open that. And the rest of the accounts, what have I done? What have I done? Close. Characters I made up myself. I'm not feeling, I'm too excited. See, the original Tomodachi Life 12 years ago, I think. And in that game, I married my now wife. At the time, we were just dating. This is Galazexio. It's fun to have like marriage and stuff in the game, and now it's been so many years later, and now I'm actually married. Galazexio, what do you like? You also like nachos.
Yum.
So this was fun to make. I didn't want to do anything too complicated because I have to redo them, but then I ended up doing that. But then I messed up his shading, so it'd be nice to have another crack at that. Galazexio, Mr. President. Again, his hair could be a bit better.
A pleasure.
What do you like? Your belly's a bit full. Orange juice.
Yum.
They still eat their drinks. I wish that wasn't a thing. So you can create the foods, you can draw everything, you can draw the clothes, you can draw the objects and the island. Oh, I haven't seen him sleeping. I kind of don't want to wake him up. That's Comics Face. That's the thing I'm probably most known for. I think my logo on my Twitch is this guy. Take my word for it. Let's wake him up.
What?
I'm sorry.
Oh,
Oh, he's happy about it.
what's up?
Oh, that's Stan.
It seems like in the retail version, more events will happen to more residents you have on your island. Yeah, heard.
Beautiful. So he's got... No, Mr. President has a crush on him, apparently. But again, they don't do anything until the full version of the game. Celery. Paella. Oh, I don't have any of your favorites. I've only got 70 cents. Alright, I don't get the... I don't get my final feed for him. Go back to bed. Does that mean in the full game everyone's gonna be sleeping? Save that even though there's been no progress. What do we got? 12 minutes. This isn't taking enough time. And I'll show you my last lot. Again, characters are made up. It's been really good to make up your own characters, and then you see them walk around, you see them talk, animate. I don't have to make up stories. Just sit back and watch them do their thing. Alright, so this says there's new clothes as well. I might have money in this account. $11.50. It's not enough for this stuff. Yeah, I've seen all this in the other ones. I just can't wait. I can't wait. 11 minutes, come on. Let's just buy that. Let's just spend all my money. First I have Madame Bugmush. She's a swamp character, one of my diggables superheroes.
I'm so glad you want to chat. I reckon.
Should I give her that shirt? Why not? She likes it. Good. And so I have Fiesco Bombasco. You see, he's the wrestler. He's got a crush on her. It's teaching me how to do clothing. I already know. Actually. What would you like to eat? Tacos is a favorite. I just spent all my money. Sushi second. Apple? I don't know any other favorites. She hates celery. I think I'm gonna leave her be. I'm sorry. I'm gonna go Kid Diggable.
Huh?
Too much like Robin.
You're looking chipper, King.
So when I add him into the real game, I think I'll give him a red mask and a helmet, butter cookie, apple, sushi. It's the same. So you've had celery, but it's not on your list of favorites. You can have some celery.
Yum.
Oh. So I don't remember him eating it that much. How's my levels? Already asked that. And lastly, Fiasco.
I feel unsettled for some reason, and that's that.
Oh, he feels it. He feels it coming.
Huh.
So this is my favorite.
Good evening,
I reckon.
Coach.
I just like how beat up he looks. Tacos, sushi. I don't have any of that. You can have some paella.
Yum.
I like his bruise. I like the bandage sticker. What else do I do for 8.5 minutes? I wish I saved the lobotomy stuff. So let's look at this. This is the next thing to unlock. 4 residents, 2 sets of friends. That should be easy enough. And this one, 5 residents. So I might not even need to, I might even unlock that first. I guess let's save that. And then I'll show you my actual island. And then but also gotta keep an eye on the time. Oh boy. Oh boy. This is me, my wife, and Batman. I haven't actually met my wife because I actually deleted someone else to put her in there. So it's like me and Batman are good friends. Yes. Here's me. The hair? The hair? I didn't think it right, but right now. Apparently it's backwards. So no use talking to them. I'm only level 2. It looks like I've never eaten tacos. But no, I'm gonna wait. Because that's not gonna bring my happiness up till the game is out. Oof, 6 minutes. I can do this though. I'll show you Alex. She made herself.
Do you need me?
She's only ever eaten celery and it was her favourite thing. Oh, she's eaten paella. And then I'll show you Batman. I hope you can't hear that in the background there. Here's Batman. Can't wait to draw his actual outfit.
Howdy.
I'm pretty happy with his mask. 5 minutes. What do we do for 5 minutes? What do we do for 5 minutes? Alright. There's no point saving. I didn't do anything. Let's just wander over to the actual game. Maybe it'll let me play a bit early. No, of course it won't. Let's look at the Nintendo. Let's do that again. Let's look at the Nintendo eShop. There it is. What's the virtual game card business? Can be re-downloaded from virtual. I don't know what that means. Let's watch this. I'm so excited.
Here, on this small island,
If it looks like I'm not excited, it is almost midnight here.
each living their own carefree lives.
When is the game
coming out?
Let's take a look at what's happening in Tomodachi Life, living the dream. You're in charge of this island. You can create me characters of anyone you'd like living here.
Oh boy.
Base them on a friend, a family member, or even yourself.
What is this? Oh, that's my microphone.
Once you've chosen their personality
My name is
and voice,
My name is
your me is
name is
good to go.
I can't wait to start living here.
So the good thing about the demo is I've gotten used to
Enjoy their island life however
the Me
they see
Creator. My first attempt at myself and Batman weren't very good,
I'm
but
absolutely ravenous.
doing it a lot, kind of learnt a lot. I learnt how to not do the shading and stuff on the face paint.
Looks like that hit the spot. This me looks bored all by their lonesome. Someone needs a pick.
Hello, Boonkit Beam. Are you excited? Are you excited? This is killing. This 2 minutes
They really
is
hit it
killing
off,
me.
all thanks to this meetup. This is just a small slice of the life here on the island. Stay tuned for more information in the future.
A lot of stuff in this first trailer I just forgot about. Just haven't seen since. Oh, well.
Today to bring you this breaking news. Following previous reports of a 2026 release date, we can now confirm that Tomodachi Life
You'll make
Living a
it.
Dream
You'll
launches
make
next
it.
spring. More on this story as it develops.
We usually have to wait so long for every other thing. The fact that Nintendo does this at midnight for us is insane. I will never. I'm so thankful. I remember that happening for Animal Crossing. Oh boy. How do I kill 1 minute 20? Yeah. What are your plans for Tomodachi Life? For your island? I think I'm going to be putting superheroes on. I've got a whole spreadsheet. I'm going to be putting my own characters. Yeah, having it on there and not being able to play it like right now, it's painful. It's the reason it's the only reason really to pre-order digitally. It's not like it's gonna run out. Yeah, just having it there for a whole week. Oh boy, oh boy. 30 seconds. Oh boy. I do remember though, Animal Crossing. It didn't automate. It took me a few minutes. It was like 5 past midnight. Drama, yes. I wish there were more like mean. I haven't seen anyone be really mean to each other. I guess I've seen the fighting where you throw stuff at each other, but I guess love triangles and stuff. Is that what you're talking? Oh, we go 2, 3, 4. What's happening? It's counting up. Let's get rid of that countdown. What do you mean I can't place? Yeah. See, it's a different message. Oh boy. Try not to try to stay chill. So it's a different message though. I just remember doing this last time for a few minutes. Let me. Please let me. It's 12:01. Hope this is fun to watch. Oh boy. Let me in. Please. Please. Alright. Just doing this because no, not that. What are you talking about? What are you talking options, just play. Already downloaded. Because I saw someone in New Zealand say that they could only do it through here. It's not working. Just let me play. Oh. Yes, do that. Do that. Yes. Alright, so there's a hot tip for everyone. If you can't play it through the virtual card, whatever. Alright, so it's happening. It's happening. Oh, it's happening. What's that, macaroon? Yeah, I work very early and I transfer data from the DEM. I get home at 4 p.m. and I just had a nap for really a very short time, but I'm not fully awake. But yeah. Well, good luck to yeah, good luck to you. Good luck with everyone. I'm so. Oh my goodness, there's my wife. She's outside of her house. Look at that. Oh my goodness. So my name's Super Island. We're gonna have a lot of superheroes on here. Oh boy. Oh boy. It's Batman.
We interrupt to bring you some breaking news. Here's what's happening on our island. There's room for another resident on Super.
Oh.
In further news, we're hearing that a TNC Renault Home Supply is likely to open
Hey, what's
one
TNC
store
stand for?
residents and 2 pairs of friends. As of press time, it's unclear why the business has such strict friend-based requirements, but I assure you that I do not make the news.
So I'm also
I just
playing.
report it.
My system is set
Thanks
to
for
North
watching.
America, just so the
Batman.
superheroes
Interrupt today.
can sound like themselves. Oh boy, they call me Mister. Okay, all right. I haven't spoiled myself, so I have no idea what's. All right, it's not. It doesn't seem like a lot. There are only 3 guys, I guess. Yeah, alright. So what's a date does that mean, though? Alright, where do I begin? Let's see what, looks like I'm having a dream. This is all news to me. I love it. Right off the bat, something I've never seen before.
What a weird dream.
Alright.
Oh.
I didn't mean to wake
What's
you up.
up?
I need to just...
I can't wait to talk to you again sometime soon, Mr.
So it gives me an American accent is the problem, but, I still have a birthday cake.
Yum.
My birthday was on the 2nd. Oh, alright. Alright. I don't care about the kids. Alright. I don't care about that stuff. Ah, here we go. I want to know why are those still grayed out. Alright. I'm I'm overwhelmed. That's not how I walk. That's not how I walk. Let's... I do like that. I am the only one with glasses so far. If I'm being honest, that's me. That's how I stand. But I do like that. Yeah, give me that. Oh. It's all happening.
I feel like I'm becoming my true self more and more.
There we go. Nice. Alright, where is... Alex has not met anyone.
Good evening. All the new buildings here on Super sure have made things more lively.
Walking between them would be a lot easier if we had some pets. Could you make some
I
for
can't
us?
do that yet. I can't do that yet. I haven't unlocked the... Alright. Yeah, I'm okay with that. You gonna let me do that without the shop?
Construction projects usually require payment up front, but I know a guy who knows a guy.
My wife
Since this
made
is
her
the
own
first
voice.
project, it'll be free of charge.
Oh,
So can we go and get started on the construction?
yes. Yes.
Oh yeah, I'm on it. Let's get going.
I need to dress these people up better.
All done. Take a look whenever.
I didn't rub my own face. I didn't do this to myself. She's still level 1 as well. She's still got more to say.
They call it beauty sleep, but it's my
Hmm.
brain that really needs it.
So you love celery and paella. Paella. You've never tried an apple.
Yum.
Yep, good. Good responsible thinking there. We're just hitting cold season. It's a bit nuts. Let's use this. Alright, so that's cool. I can. Alright, strangers. Everyone's a stranger to Alex. Batman's not sleeping.
Good evening. Got a sec? I want to chat.
Sure. Sure, Batman. What?
Are you the competitive type, mister? I can't help but wonder. Well, if you could pick any type of competition
What's
to
happening?
participate in, what would it be?
This is so sinister. Any type of competition to participate in, what would it be? I just want to know all about you and the world you live in. Alright. This is spooky music. Jeez. Oh. Thanks. It's the thing about having the demo for a few weeks is I've my first attempt of Batman wasn't great, but just kept chipping away. I like it's not a competitive thing, but I like to draw. Drawing. Let's say drawing comics. No, I haven't made a comic in a long time.
Drawing comics. Oh, I can totally see that. You speaking at the podium after drawing comics to victory. Impressive.
I'm still surprised there's stuff I still haven't seen, and like instantly as well. You probably do need a computer, Batman. How does Batman work? That's him. Yeah, he's out to get you. I do like that though. That's pretty good. Oh, that's good. Karate yes. That's the top. That's the top run for now. Yeah. Karate style.
I feel like I got one step closer to my true self.
The trick with Batman as well is his skin is black and it's the actual flesh tone is painted on. That way it covers his entire head from every angle. Getting the pupilless eyes as well was a bit
I
of
wonder
a
if future
challenge.
me will be more motivated than current me.
Batman, you're pretty motivated. Sushi's your favorite. Celery, paella, I don't have any of that. Let's go to the shop. I don't want to waste money on food though. You've never had orange juice. Let's see how you feel about orange
Yum.
juice. Yeah, I've seen. I can't really do realist. I'm also not that interested in realistic art. Especially in this game. I've seen some really impressive things, and then the mouths and eyes don't move. What was that? I got an hourglass. It's not very bad. I can't wait to get. I just can't wait to just dig in. Let's see. This. My wife's really good at realistic drawing. Probably get her to make some items and stuff. Let's look at everything. I think I'm more interested in the quirks. Alright. Walks by bounding sounds cool. Oh, Alex already has a problem.
Good evening.
I gotta get her out of this hamster
It
costume.
gets all dark and lonely and spooky here on Super after nightfall.
So I called it Super Island, but I don't like when they shorten to Super. I don't know what to do about that. This is typical Alex, she would get scared at the night time. Is this gonna be free? I only have 20 something dollars. I don't have that much money.
Should we go ahead with the construction?
I don't have that money. Wait, I got 145. What did that? Alright.
Oh yeah, I'm on it.
So I've been getting money for every little thing I do. It's good to know.
All done. Take a look whenever.
Thank you, Alex. And that gave me money as well. That cost 30. Alright. Let's look at clothes. Whoa. Alright. So this is different to the ones I just saw. Alright. There's nothing really Batman-y or that's pretty cool. Alright, so these I've seen. Let's dress Alex up in this one. Yeah. It's only one color. I'm okay with my outfit for now. What is bunny tail? See, I'm thinking Harley Quinn already with that. The cat backpack is pretty cool. What's this one? I'll have that. That's pretty cool. Where was that? Yeah, alright. As we add more characters, I just happened to have that when I made a Batman, which is pretty handy. I'm gonna go for those mismatched socks just for later. $75.
Welcome.
Alright, this is new. Run of everything. So that was the daily specials. One of I'm spending too much money. $52, that's too much. No. Let's just do new stuff. Although, I think tacos was someone's favorite. Salary was someone's favorite. Alright.
Thank you very much.
Now, everyone's kind of happy, but let's add a me. What's Batman doing? I can't wait till I can try his outfit on. Thanks for the follow, Moon Kitty Beam. We'll be streaming this more often, definitely. Can kind of count on that. I want to see where this guy's going. Someone's got a problem. Alex again. She needs to meet. What's happening? Oh no. I'll bring someone. Can I wake up? This is how I meet my wife.
Wah. Oh. What's up?
Being woken up is the worst thing you could possibly do. No, I want to grab you and then take you to Alex. Just walk into this stranger's house.
Are you in trouble?
Please, help me.
I see. This is gonna take a lot of elbow grease.
What am I doing?
I just cleaned my elbows.
Hey.
Thank you.
It was no trouble at all.
So as I created Alex, I
Thanks for that.
put
I'm a
that
lot
we are
closer to
married.
Alex now.
So maybe that's an automatic relationship. I don't know.
Well,
So I have to make a new. Let's see where this is going. Let's look at Batman in the background there. We're going to my place? Alright. Okay. Yeah, forget about I didn't change her clothes. No, I hate this fucking... I hate this rope and I hate the toilet paper.
Hey.
Right.
Guess you're a bit of a night owl.
Yes, I'm a bit of a night owl. It's friggin' launch day. Here we go. Yes. Oh, so close to leveling up. Alright, you.
So, you'll even charcoal with the Grand P. And that's it when people
Alright.
step.
I hate that rope. Yeah, I like that I got out of my pajamas. Alright, he's just doing that. I think I'm gonna make a Superman. Just to go with the thing. Is that too square jawed? No, it's kind of perfect. Let's go with that. I can't use the touch screen and stream at the same time, which is a bit annoying. I might have to draw the curl on. It's so high. That could go into a curl. Alright, yeah, it's gotta be one of those ones up there. There was the if I do alright. I wish I could change the size of that. I didn't really think of who I'm gonna add first. No. I want to eventually right. Oh, that's kind of good. There's nothing that's kind of starts. I want like kind of the start of a curl, but that's not gonna. I don't think that's gonna happen. That's too flat. It's kind of too big, but it's close. Were any of these better? Maybe that's better? What's going on there? I don't have a subcolor on. Is that just a fade? Yeah. Maybe that? No. No. I didn't think this would be so difficult. I think that let's start at the start again. No, no. Maybe? No. 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 I like that, but I don't like the fade. I really want to get into the rest of the game. What was the one I liked here? This one. Yeah. This one. Or maybe that one. Or maybe even that one. This one. This one? This is the same as my eyebrows. Yeah, like he's not angry, but he's not, yeah. That's good. I'll move his eyes down. He has blue eyes, famously. Not those ones though. That's kind of alright. Again, I think these are the same I gave myself. Yeah, let's move everything down a bit. Oh wait, no, I didn't mean that. Yeah. Nose. The default nose is always kind of good. Yeah. He should be smiling. Maybe this kind of smile. I think that's yeah, this or that. Or this? Yeah. 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 I can't wait to give everyone costumes. None of these. Maybe. None of those. All right. I like smooth. Yeah, that's all good. No. Yeah. Oh boy. Yeah, I really want to be using the touch screen here. Let's go bit by bit. Yeah. Whoa. Oh, it's so lumpy. This is gonna be a... I'm gonna try something crazy here. I wish I could kind of squish it a bit though. Maybe lowercase s. Hey, that's kind of alright. Nah. Yeah. It's not much different, hey. I want to squish it. I want to change the size, but not in proportion. You know what? Just put that there and then draw over it. Just to make it not such a text. Nah, I'm not happy with this. It's a bit better. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Oh. Look. You know, I think I want to give him this one. Yeah. Yeah. I'm happy with that. Superman's gotta be as tall as Batman. Big muscles. This guy's name? What's Superman?
My name is Superman.
Oh, come on. Male dates females, yes. I'd like to have him and Lois have a baby, and it's Superboy. That's just like it is in the Link Spare Kitty. This game just released at midnight, so I had to get right in. I have a spreadsheet with everyone's birthday and age. They're not really canonical, so but Superman's 40.
My name is Superman.
My name is
My name is Superman. It's nice to meet you. Today is April 16th, 2026. So, how does this voice say? My name is Superman. It's nice to.
My name is My name is My name
Deep.
My name is Superman. My name is Superman.
My name is Superman. My name is Superman. My name is Superman. My name is Superman. My name is Superman. It's nice to. My name is Superman. My name is Superman. My name is Superman. My name is Superman. It's nice to meet you. My name is Superman. My name is Superman.
Yeah, been
My
told
name is
about a
Superman.
bit of that.
My name is Superman.
Thanks for
My name
joining
is
me on
Superman.
the stream.
It's nice to meet you. Today is April 16th, 2026. So, how does this voice sound? My name is Superman.
No.
My name is Superman. It's nice to meet you. Today is April 16th, 2026. My name is Superman. My name is Superman. My name is Superman. It's nice to meet you.
A default.
Today is April 16th, 2020.
Yeah, good luck with all the moving and stuff. Jeepers. Quick, but let's leave room for quicker. Very polite. Very damn cheap. This stuff's kind of tricky for me. Serious and chill. More normal than quirky. Yeah, we spent a few days moving all of my crap from my parents' garage. It was like the tiniest bit of moving, but yeah, I don't want to do that ever again. Sociable, optimistic, and passionate fellow. Outgoing, pleasant to be around, makes... Yeah, that's Superman. Oh. I don't know why I wasn't expecting his house.
Hey there. It's nice to meet you, Mr. I'm Superman. I'm an outgoing merrymaker. I'm a social butterfly who loves hanging out with friends. Leave it to me, and I'll find the fun in anything. I can't wait to start living here.
His mouth doesn't move much. I don't like his mouth much.
Once I get into something, I go hard until I max it out, you know? Then I move on.
Not very Superman, actually. Superman, what do you like to eat? Superman. Give you some French onion soup.
Yum.
Superman. Oh, good luck with that. I'm glad there's stuff around, like... I hope it's helpful. I'm gonna give you... Why is it an option? I don't want to give him a... Let's go to the clothing shop. I'll be able to customize stuff for him at one point, but for now... Or do I just leave him in that? Just leave him in those clothes till I can... Good, thank you. Balance is the important bit. Give him an hourglass. Sure. Someone's got problems. That's me this time. What's Alex doing?
Why did I come here again?
Classic Alex.
Good evening. I want to be
Hee
friends with I.
hee.
What should we talk about?
Oh.
What did you have in mind?
Yeah, I think she's only eaten two things to be fair. Scene making. In the demo that Alex was playing, I didn't like orange juice, and I actually
Sign making?
I actually love orange juice. So you actually get to choose how to pronounce words.
Scene making?
That's better.
Got it. I'll go talk to him about scene making.
This is too real.
Good evening. Do you feel like talking about scene making?
Sure, but tell me, Alex, how good are you at scene making?
I don't want to brag or anything, but I don't think you'll find anyone on Hall of Super who's better at scene making than me.
That's something she would
amazing.
say.
I really respect folks who are good at scene making.
Alex made
Wanna be
herself,
friends?
and I can't change it. I can't edit it. I mean, I can. I'm just not allowed to. Look at that poster in the background. There's not enough stripy hair options. So, like, the stripes are exact, but, the little tuck. Alright. What will she call Ive when talking with others? I think she'll say, I think I'm gonna leave that.
Nice. I knew scene making would bring I and me together.
I hope Alex shows me all the tricks of the trade.
That's how it happens. Alex, what does Alex get? She loves computer. I've got new. That's how she. That's pretty cool. I was just saying how in the original game, the original game came out when we were just dating for like a year, and then we got married in the game, and it was really cool. And then now, married in real life, that's she's gonna love that one. That's pretty cool. That's funny. Nah, she's gonna love that one. But I want to give that to others though. Yeah. Let's look through the other things. How's she gonna stand? She doesn't have glasses. That's her. I have to tell her to go to the toilet. Greeting? Let's do the swagger walk, yeah. She's gonna love it. Did I also level up?
I feel a bit more like myself.
Someone's... Oh, what's happening? Superman's got issues.
Huh. I've got some time to spare.
What's this?
Do you want to play no repeats with me?
Yes? What is it? Pick the name of a food. The game ends if someone picks something that isn't a food. Is too slow to... I saw them play this while they play soccer.
No repeats. Food.
Alright.
Grapes.
Oh,
Gratin.
Tomato.
Garlic.
Cherries.
Bacalhau.
I don't know what that is. Chicken tikka masala.
Gazpacho.
Hard candy.
Borscht.
Green pepper.
Strawberry shortcake.
Mint candy. I'm such a gamer.
Pain au chocolat.
Apple pie.
Grapes.
Oh, you lost.
Grapes is a repeat. That was on a whole nother
I bet
level.
Superman. I'm better than Superman. What's my reward?
Congratulations, you won. Time for your prize. Go ahead, pick one.
That's pretty crappy. That glass ornament. Something's happening here. What are we doing? Heart-to-heart discussion. Alright. What's up with Ive?
Don Collab drawing comics, rep Sueto.
Will he go maximal? Not any other kitty. So, you leave the charcoal with it ready. Oh, glass.
Uh-oh. I'm in love. Oh, this is how it happened. Too real.
What's happening to me? Looking at Alex has got my heart racing. Could what I'm feeling for Alex be love?
Yes.
I knew it. Feelings like this can't be anything but love. I'm going to take a deep breath and ask Alex out.
Already? Already? Yeah, I'm still on the old Switch. Memories of fighting crime. Yeah, if this was a Switch 2 exclusive, I would have got a Switch 2. Alright. See, I'm not a big fan of these, but I do want to unlock these. Let's try a camera. So she thinks we're great friends, but I got a whole crush. Superman's got something else to say. I'll bring someone. Batman's gonna meet Superman for the first time. Batman's bored and wants some company. Well, Batman.
What's the matter?
I just can't move.
I see. This is gonna take a lot of elbow grease.
Aw, I just cleaned my elbows.
Maybe I'll give my camera to Alex then.
I vow to return the favor one day.
Anyone would have helped.
Lymphanor 2. Chapel. Regal check.
So there was a shop that unlocked once I had 2 sets of friends. This one. Alex is looking pretty. There's the swagger. Yeah, that's Alex. So I've got some issues. So the limit of Mies is 70.
Hey, good evening.
So I can't imagine how
I feel like I could
complicated
use a
that gets.
style update. You know, something new to wear.
I like what you got, but I'm gonna have to go to the shop. I could just change your shoes. Let's go to the shop. I gave myself a nice little shirt. Actually, no, you've got clothes. You've got clothes.
I feel like I could use a...
Yeah. Wait. Create outfit. I gave you a shirt that you didn't like. It's right there. Why does it say I haven't got it? If they don't like an outfit, do they just get rid of it? What do I wear? I like t-shirts, I like short sleeve shirts. I'm just gonna give you a different it is a bit chilly these days. Let's go for I don't like any of these colors. Maybe a yellow. It's game monies. Alright, now I need to make an outfit. Crap. No, I can just do that. No real life monies here. I can't wait to decorate the rooms.
I think I'm falling for Alex.
What are you gonna do about it? There's someone else's issues now. Alex. What are these two doing? They're walking a bit too close. What are you doing? Alright, now we both got issues.
Good evening. This place doesn't really
You get to
match
choose.
my vibe. Can we change up this room?
Oh, here we go, here we go. You do get to choose the currency. Here we go. I don't know what TNC stands for.
We interrupt to bring you some breaking news. Here's what's happening on our island. A renovation center has officially opened on Super.
The eye
The local
bags
TNC
on the
Reno Home
eyes are,
Supply
I would
sells
love to get
interior
rid of.
sets, which can breathe new life into residents' homes. Hopes are high that this
I'm
will
excited
raise the
about
quality
this.
of life for island residents, or at the very least, brighten things up a little. Thanks for watching. I'm Superman, and you're up to date.
Alright, so we're making Alex's room.
Welcome.
Whoa! Okay. See the paintbrush icons? That's custom stuff I am dying to unlock. That's not very Alex. I think she likes plants. That's a bit Alex. Not that one, no. Maybe. No. That's kind of cute. That's pretty cool. I think this one is the most Alex. But what color? See, if it was me, I'd go red. I think maybe purple.
Thank you very much. Please come again.
I think this one is if we had unlimited monies.
Display. Can we change up this room's look?
Press X. House editor. Interior, exterior. Whoa. Oh, so you can mix and match the room with different wallpaper stuff. Yes, this is the kind of thing Alex would love. Yeah, I knew it. So it is nice you get money
This
for
is
spending
exactly
money.
the kind of room I wanted to live in. Thank you.
Yeah, that voice.
When I talked to Ive about scene making, we both got super into it. Now we're friends.
What now?
We interrupt to bring you some breaking news. Here's what's happening on our island. Super is now capable of sustaining 5 individual lives, meaning another resident can move to the island, and we can finally field a basketball team. We've also received word that a quick build amenities is likely
Quick-
to open
oh,
sometime after that
yeah.
special someone arrives. Thanks for watching.
I think Wonder
I'm
Woman
Alex,
next.
and you're up to date.
We need another lady. So someone's got issues, I've got issues. And I don't like that yellow jumper, actually.
I feel so at peace when I'm with you, Alex.
Really? Thank you for saying.
So,
I've gone mad.
will you go out with me?
Oh, no, thank you. You may feel at peace, but I crave
That's
more.
Alex.
It would never work out.
Hold up. Did I just get rejected during my own practice
I've
run?
lost my mind. This is... I'm just surprised how many new stuff I've seen. I just haven't been spoiled at all. So I am gonna looking to make some babies with Batman's gonna make a baby, and it's gonna be Robin. And Superman's also gonna have a baby. It's gonna be Superboy. Oh, wasn't paying attention here. So this is... okay, these are rooms I can make. Cat person. Kitchen, athletic. Maybe I should make Lois Lane. I like this books one. Get one as a bonus. So which, hang on, I should be thinking about what room do I want? Or what? There's no real Batman or Superman room. I think the book one for Batman. I should, yeah, I was thinking Batman for this. He's always reading. So I don't think I got money for that yet, though.
Mr. Hi.
I'll have that grading.
Just once, I want someone to unironically tell me I'm so edgy, or that I look like I have a wild side. Can you get me some clothes that make it look like I'm not scared of a walk on the wild side?
Alright. Let's go to the shop. I think there was a black leather jacket. Batman, I don't think there's... I think I gave you the most edgiest thing. It's not very edgy. What if I give you these jeans but in black? Alright, yeah. You're wearing bat wings, that's pretty edgy. There was like a biker outfit, but I think that was a daily thing. It's gone. Yeah. Your tummy looks a bit empty. You've never had this before.
Yum.
So Batman's never met Alex. Oh, Superman's never met Alex. Superman's never met me. Let's make our next. What's Superman doing? Oh, cool. So that unlocks the. I don't know how to unlock the
Welcome.
customization thing. Yeah, I don't have room
Please
for the
come
books.
again.
All right. So if I want Robin, I need to make Talia. If I want Superboy, I need to make Lois Lane. Let's make Lois. I like when she has her short hair from her original appearance. I don't know if we have that. That's pretty cute. It's like... I don't really know how to describe hairstyles, really. It's like very short, like this, at the back. Then the front is... It's kind of cute. That's kind of it. I'm thinking very original 40s. I'm thinking comic books. She had this from like the 40s up to the 70s. Very short. That's kind of it. A bit kind of fluffier. No. trying to bring it up. Lois Lane. Original hair. Bad. Oh, it's like a little roll. It's like a little I'm not good at hair terms. It's like a little rolly fringe kind of. I don't think that exists here. Hee, that's kind of cute. The thing is, there's no wrong way to do it. I like that, that's cute. Yeah, the thing I'm thinking isn't here. Really long at the front and short. That's kind of cute. I like that one. And is the subcolor of the hair clip? I knew what would be. Let's make it white. I was trying to bring up the browser in. Yeah, looped over. I can't really do that though. Looking at her eyebrows. That's kind of close. That's kind of what it was actually. Not angry. Maybe smaller. Eyeballs. I don't think eyelashes. I think I can get rid of those eyelashes there. Yeah, I like that. Let's bring those a bit down. Yeah, and there, yeah. She has kind of violet-y eyes. Yeah. Nose, I can't give her the same nose as Superman. Yeah. Yeah. Mouth. That's cute. I don't think of her as having a lipstick though, you know. Yeah, it's kind of more natural. I didn't even change her head shape. Maybe that was the right one though. Yeah. She's got ears. It's not giving that 40s look that I want. That old-fashioned-y. I might as well just give her long hair, I think. If I'm not getting what I want. It's cute. Nah, I like it. I like it. None of this. None of that. I don't picture her with makeup. So she's a bit taller than Alex, shorter than Superman. Kind of my height. I'm in my pajamas again. I don't need to do the full name.
My name is Lois.
She's female, she's into males. I've got a spreadsheet with birthdays. Eight. 17. 40. Because that's what I've made. That's what I've made Superman.
My name is Lois. My name is Lois. My name is My name is Lois. It's nice to meet you. My name is Lois. My name is Lois. My name is Lois.
She's fast. Talker.
My name is Lois. My name is Lois. It's nice to meet you. Today is April 16th, 2026. So, how does this voice sound?
Yeah, I'm happy with that. Oh, so if I make her the partner of Superman. She's not superpowered, so she's on the slower side. She's pretty honest. Energy. She's more serious than chill. She's pretty friggin' normal. Yep. Confident by the books. Yeah. They're right next to each other.
Hey. You must be Mr. It's nice to meet you. My name is Lois. I'm an ambitious achiever. I focus on a goal and don't stop until I hit it. As long as I stay focused, I can do anything. Thanks in advance for looking after me here.
Gotta give her some normal clothes.
Sometimes I worry I'm gonna screw something up, so I just end up not even trying.
That's not very Lois. What? Oh, the glass ornament. Yeah. Sure. Also, gotta feed you. Give you some tacos.
Yum.
Oh. How do you know I like tacos? Gotta give her some clothes. No one's got any issues? a nice outfit. Yeah, she gets that. Batman wants something. So the purple, so that expression, oh no. I think Superman's gonna have to help him.
Are you alright?
Please help me.
Aha. There's the source of the problem.
You might need to use a little more oomph. I vow to return the favor one day.
What a relief. You're okay.
Nice.
Yeah, grab it snap out though.
So you friends now?
Yeah. Well, Ramandi Math. Tindalonga. A. Rumlock. Thailanka. Right. Me. Babagrapple. Ringle Chaxton.
Let's see what they up to.
Limper. Ship cap. Dava. Limpanora 2.
Quattroni.
Did I lock the house?
Yetsoroni. Validala Clava.
Nothing beats a good sit.
Hmm.
Can we get a bench around here?
Oh, I unlocked the thing. I unlocked the shop. Yes. I want the custom shop. Pallet house.
Interrupt to bring you some breaking news. Here's what's happening on our island. A shop where one can purchase amenities and facilities for the island has arrived at our shores. Known as Quick Build, the shop sells buildings, objects, and other things necessary for making the island your own. One resident is quoted as saying, you mean I can go into this building and buy a whole different building? If you say
Oh,
so.
do I now buy
Thanks
shops?
for watching. I'm Alex, and you're up to date.
I might be able to buy shops.
Welcome.
Alright, it's just gonna let me do that now.
Thank you very much.
Alright. Where do I put the bench? Can I put a bench near the fountain? Let's... Here. Oh. Oh, you want me to put it there, do you? Oh, I'm gonna second, let me put it there. Alright.
My dream bench.
That's lowest one.
Now I can engage in some high-octane relaxing.
I want to go back to the shop.
We interrupt to bring you some breaking news. Here's what's happening on our island. Super can now support 6 souls, so keep an eye out for a new face. In related news, once that 6th resident arrives, the island builder will become available.
Okay, so the
The
island builder is
will allow
different
the island
to
be redesigned freely. Not for free.
quick build.
Buildings and objects will still cost money, but without restriction. My notes are very clear on this. Thanks for watching. I'm Alex, and you're up to date.
Okay. What's Lois doing?
I've got some time to spare.
Oh, here we
Do you
go.
want to play no repeats with me? No repeats. Food. Garlic.
Pistachios.
Grilled cheese.
Carrot cake. Tamamori.
Fried chicken.
Mushroom. Carrot cake also.
Peach. Sorry,
What?
mister, but carrot cake is a repeat.
I don't remember carrot cake.
Hey, you can't win them all. But you can get this as a consolation prize.
Toilet paper. Knew it. So it wants me to make another guy, but I want to look back. I want to look at that shop again. Okay. Okay. Not excited by any of that. I want that stuff. I haven't given the camera to anyone yet. Eating styles. Oh, come on, let me do it. Level 10. So I've already done that. Alright, alright, alright. Someone should have a guitar. I don't have enough warm fuzzies. What am I doing here then? Can I do anything? Alright, it's just showing that there's new stuff there. I need to go to the bathroom and it's not. It's
Good evening. I've been thinking too hard. My head feels all fuzzy inside.
Let me take a look.
Help me clear my mind.
Alright, Superman.
Phew. I feel so much better now.
Cool. What else?
I know that being up this late is going to make tomorrow tough.
Yeah. I'm gonna take a little break, but I'll leave it on. What am I doing? I'll leave it right there. Me blowing bubbles.
A weak-looking elastic rope. Too scary. But also, well,
I'm back. Stopped blowing bubbles. So someone's got issues. Batman's having a dream. He's just met Superman, so now he's got to try and fly. He's doing it.
Aw. Huh. Guess it was just
Look
a
at his
dream.
ears poke out of his sleeping hat.
Oh. What's up?
I know, I didn't want to wake you up.
I don't really understand Ive's taste in music.
Okay. Check this shop and then make someone.
Welcome.
Whoa. So let's go. Oh. Why would I want more of these? This is nice stuff. I don't have the money though. This is gonna be good. Yeah,
Please
nothing
come
for
again.
me. So I think I need some bad. I need some bad guys. I think I'm gonna make a Joker. Maybe that was good. I don't know how much longer I can keep playing. But I really want to unlock the custom stuff. See, there's no real wrong way to do a lot of these guys. I don't know about the long-haired Joker though. I like that. What's the messiest? I think that's pretty cool. Not long. Yeah, I think that's right. Let's go with the eyes, move them down. I don't want the hair to get in the way of the eyebrows. Yeah. There's so many possible eyes here. Where's the one that's like round? That's the one I was thinking of. No, that's the one I was thinking of. Yeah. I think let's go straight to his mouth. It's gotta be. Yeah. Get back to his eyes. I didn't play with any of this. Yeah. Yeah. fully black? See, I don't think that's... Yeah. Can this go behind the eyes? Yeah. It's the Joker. Tools, Batman. Skinny. Joker.
My name is Joker.
He won't say anything. Wait. Yeah. Joker's birthday. Age. Everyone's 40.
My name is Joker.
My name is Joker. It's nice to meet you.
My name is
My name is Joker.
My name is Joker. My name is Joker. My name is Joker. My name is Joker. My name is
My name is Joker. It's nice to meet you. My name is Joker. My name is Joker. It's nice to meet.
My name is Joker.
My name is Joker. My name is Joker. My name is Joker. My name is Joker. My name is Joker. My name is Joker. It's nice to meet you. My name is Joker. My name is Joker. My name is Joker. It's nice to meet you. My name is Joker. It's nice to meet you. My name is Joker. It's nice to meet you. My name is Joker. It's nice to meet you. My name is Joker. It's nice to meet you. My name is Joker. It's nice to meet you. My name is Joker. It's nice to meet you. My name is Joker. It's nice to meet you.
No. It's interesting. He's very serious. He's a murderer. Yeah. But yeah. Yep, that's him. Oh, I gotta connect that. I gotta connect that somehow.
Hey there. It's nice to meet you, mister. I'm Joker. I'm an outgoing go-getter who loves exploring new ideas. I tend to do whatever comes to mind. I can't wait to start
So I'd like to
living
dress him
here.
up.
I'm thinking of writing a book about fighting crime. What do you think?
Know you love crime. He's gonna love a chocolate sundae.
Yum.
I knew it. Close. Why is it? Oh, I never gave that to Lois. Alright. Something purple. It's not a lot of purple. Purple jumper, purple shirt. No. I think this blouse. Yeah. Yeah. Now I think the new shop should open. It's not very purple. Yeah, he's not attached to the rest of the island. Oh, it's just happening. That's fun. More people.
We interrupt to bring you some breaking news. Here's what's happening on our island. Super is now freely welcoming residents, meaning anyone can land upon our humble shores anytime. Residents are overjoyed at the news, calling in to say, finally, a fresh audience, and our numbers will soon be multitudinous. There will be no stopping us. Our might will be infinite. Thanks for watching. I'm Alex, and you're up to date.
All right. All right. Can I? I'd like to connect everything. I'd like to connect everything. I'd like to see what's happening here, though.
You're looking chipper, mister. My room could use a new vibe.
Sure. I'd like to buy that.
Welcome.
So what kind of house do I want? That's kind of cool. Trying to get $98. I like that one. I don't know how much I like that one actually. Yeah,
Thank you very much. Please come again.
running low on cash.
Yeah, this is different. Thank you.
Alright, $28. I never used the other interior. Oh no. Lois. Oh, she's sleeping.
Oh. Ha.
And it says hi Lois and Superman met. What? Lois, what are you doing? What do you mean?
Are you alright?
There we go.
Please help me.
There we go.
Oof. I've never seen a case this bad before.
I'm gonna be okay, though. Right? Thank you.
Don't worry about it.
Are they hanging out now?
TV.
TD.
No, going to separate ways. New gifts. Alright, so I've done all those. Did I already do a guitar? Let's do it. Who do I give the guitar to?
Hey. Guess you're a bit of a night owl. It may just be my imagination, but I get the feeling that I've has a crush on me. Really? Well, now I'll be thinking about this for the rest of the day.
Oh, why did that not become a crush? It's the camera. just wanna connect bits. Ah, I can't do that. How do I get more? I'm not doing that. Uh-oh. What? Was I meant to do something? I'm gonna add one more thing just to see. Just to see. Oh, there's the limit there. I don't know if I want everyone coupling up. But like I have a Joker. I should make a Harley. Maybe I'll wait till I have the Jester costume. I want to make someone else though. Let's make. Can I go all the way back? Can make a Luthor. It's gonna be pretty easy. That's pretty close to the animated. And if this doesn't unlock something, then I'm gonna, I think I'm gonna call it a night. Yeah, I like that. Looks like a smug dude. Mm-hmm. I think that's great. I should have full names actually.
My name is Lex Luthor. My name is Lex Luthor.
Luthor.
My name is Lex Luthor.
Yep. Spreadsheet. Can I search? Cause I don't see him. Wait. Legion of Doom. 28th of the 9th. And a photo is 40 again. It makes sense.
My name is Lex Luthor. It's nice to meet you.
My name is Lex Luthor. It's my name is Lex Luthor.
My name is Lex Luth.
My name is Lex Luth.
My name is Lex Luth.
My name is Lex Luthor. My name is Lex Luthor. It's nice to meet you. My name is Lex. My name is Lex Luthor. My name is Lex Luthor. It's nice to meet you. My name is Lex Luthor. It's nice to meet you. My name is Lex Luthor. It's nice to meet you. Today is April 16th, 2026. My name is Lex Luthor. 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 My name is Lex Luth. My name is Lex Luthor.
No. Yep. Oh, it's the right color too. Now, does this unlock anything? Now you'll be able to place houses anywhere you like on the island. Cool.
Hey. You must be Mr. It's nice to meet you. My name is Lex Luthor. I'm an ambitious rogue. My friends mean the world to me, but I
I'm a
also
suit.
like to do things on my own sometimes. Thanks in advance for looking after me here. I want to eat something you made with your own hands, Mr.
What? Custom house, pellet house. Yes. This is what I wanted. Yeah. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness.
We interrupt to bring you some breaking news. Here's what's happening on our island.
I'm gonna do this thing for Luthor.
Pallet House Workshop has opened on Super.
And then I'm gonna make an
At the local
outfit
Pallet House, Mr. can make all sorts of things
for
for
Superman
residents,
or Batman,
like
and
food
then
and
that's
clothing.
it. Then that's it.
Excited residents have been calling in with comments like, "It's about time," and "Can you make me an edible tuxedo?" Thanks for watching. I'm Joker, and you're up to date.
Oh, this is what I wanted. Piece of cake. Alright, let's look at the stamps. It could have a birthday cake on top. Oh. What do we got here? Oh my goodness, I could put another cake on the. Oh, this. Oh, yeah, alright. It's alright. This cake has cake on it. No, it doesn't. Can I change the color at all? This is a good cake. What a game. Strawberry on the side. And a drizzle. That's disgusting. No. Sprinkles. I think that's good. This is a fun cake.
fun cake.
Singular. Sweet. It's sweet. Sweet treat. I'm gonna say it's cold. Oh, medium's good. That's silly. How much money do I
Welcome.
have? $81, that's good.
Thank you very much. Yum.
I'm gonna buy him a suit and then I'm gonna do my things. Gotta rub his head. Gotta rub his head too. Clothing.
I suppose I can be a bit too honest sometimes.
Yeah, I know about that. Someone wants something.
It's your turn to spin the wheels of fate. Come play coin spin with me.
I never won this in the demo.
What do you think it'll be? Heads or tails?
Heads.
Heads, huh? Well, let's see if you're right.
Come on.
Aw, too bad. It's tails.
That's 2 games I've lost to her.
Hey, you can't win them all. But you can get this as a consolation prize.
Different. Oh. Here we go. Can sell that stupid code.
We interrupt.
That's all the shops I wanted.
Here's what's happening on our island. A very reputable pawn shop has opened on Super. You'll want to visit the right price to sell off any treasure you don't need anymore. Locals are responding to the news with, "Will they buy my pocket lens?" And I was told this treasure is priceless, but the cashier sure was glad to put a price tag on it. Thanks for watching. I'm Joker, and you're up to date.
Let me look at it. That's Superman's problem.
Huh? Hey, guess you're a bit of a night owl. Ugh. I've been thinking
Again?
too hard. My head feels all fuzzy inside. Help me clear my mind. Phew. I feel so much better now. Yum.
So I'm gonna buy Luther a suit. I want to see if I can create a suit. Oh, can I make him float around? Yeah.
I feel like I got one step closer to my true self.
Yes. Joker.
Huh? Good evening. My room could use a new vibe.
Okay.
Welcome.
So what's a silly Joker one? Maybe the neon. That's so much of my money though. They're not very jokery. I'm gonna do it.
Thank you very much. Please come again.
Can't rotate or anything.
It looks great now. Thank you.
Can't buy Luther a suit now. Something's happening here. Yes. All right. That's exciting. So what's new here?
Welcome.
Ah. Okay, that's
Please come again.
gonna make clothes. This is exciting. So you can't do onesies, but you can do long sleeve top and pants. All right. Okay. I'm gonna do Superman's outfit. Not quite. Nope. I'm not good at colors. I think the light blue was the best one. Yeah. Alright, so... Alright. Oh, that's gonna... Yeah, no, I want just the red. Alright, that's alright. How do I do it symmetrical? That's fine. Maybe not smooth. And also maybe not. Maybe a bit smaller, maybe that one. Let's see. Gonna have to use touchscreen for all of this stuff. Get in there. Yeah, yeah. Now, yeah. Hang on. Whoops. How do I... Yeah, that's the way. Whoop, no, can't do that yet. Can't do that. And then that. Yeah. suppose. Just a different yellow. No, it's the same yellow, isn't it? Different enough. Oh, what have I done there? Yep. Do you mean, am I giving it a name? What do you mean, what type? It's Superman. Superman top.
Superman top.
Oh, interesting. I can't do multiple ones. Outdoor uniform. I'm gonna say outdoor. Is for Superman. Go back and edit them again. So then I have to buy it. $5 is good. Jericho wants something. Batman's sleeping. Alex is gonna meet Joker.
Hello?
Bye-bye. Won't ma move?
I see. This is gonna take a lot of elbow grease.
I just cleaned my elbows.
It's 2:30 a.m. I'm gonna
Thank
give
you.
Superman his outfit
no
and
trouble at all.
then call it a night.
Thanks so much. I feel like I got really close to Joker, thanks to you.
Oh, move.
Should I make Superman's pants?
Huh? Something on your mind? If I'm being honest, I could be a better listener.
I'm gonna tuck his shirt in. Yeah. Alright, I'm also gonna buy Luther a suit. it's almost all my money. Did I? I don't think I gave Lois her address.
Something you need. Every time I open a window, I feel like a million bugs rush in.
I didn't mean it, but
Maybe.
he's got a bit of a Gene Hackman outfit, Gene Hackman face. That's good. What? I don't care. Man, I'm gonna do Batman's house while I'm here. How do I do this? Books.
This is exactly the kind of room I wanted to live in. Thank you.
Someone wants something. Oh, no, there's a dream going on.
As long as I have my fun cake, I can face anything life throws at me. More, please. If this is a dream, I don't want to wake up. Throw a fun cake on me, then do it again
Okay.
and again. That's the dream. How nice. If this is a dream. Ah. Such a strange dream. Oh. What's up? I was talking to Joker, and I got in a bad mood for some reason.
Yeah, I was gonna give her the camera. I want to see what the camera does. But not now. Right now,
Thank you.
time for bed.
When I talked to Ive about scene making, we both got super into it. Now we're friends.
Someone else wants something. It's gonna be one of those games.
Huh? Good evening. I've been thinking too hard. My head feels all fuzzy inside. Help me clear my
Messages
mind.
and puddles.
Phew. I feel so much better now.
A treasure rather than a gift.
Hopping into the right price pawn shop is kind of fun.
I haven't done
even
that
if
yet.
Just to see all the different treasures they have lined up. Treasures may sell for more than you might think, so it's a good idea to check it out once in a while.
Did I even build it? I did, didn't I? I haven't even been here.
Nice seeing you here.
Alright. Can I not sell the stupid,
Nice stuff you got. Ha, that's a rare one. That's quite the find.
I want to sell that elastic cord.
Come back again.
So if no one else wants anything, I'm gonna quickly save it. And then quit. Stop here. Oh my goodness, thanks for that. Thanks for anyone who watched. If you are watching this on YouTube, check me out on Twitch. If you're watching this right now on Twitch, check me out on YouTube. So over on Instagram, Blue Sky. Thank you so much. I'll stream this again tomorrow and the next few days probably. I think I'll draw a few things on the touch screen off stream, but yep, goodbye, thank you, love you, bye.